There was a time when saving your work meant hearing a familiar little click, a whir, and a hopeful pause as your computer decided whether your disk was readable that day. If that sound takes you back, you already know the magic of floppy disks. And if you've only ever seen them as the save icon, then you're about to meet the tiny plastic square that carried entire worlds of data long before clouds and thumb drives ever existed. This isn't just a piece of technology, it's a time capsule. Welcome back to Retro Treasure Unearthed, where we reconnect with the forgotten chapters of tech history, one artifact at a time. Today, we're unlocking the story of the floppy disk, the little magnetic hero that defined personal computing for more than 3 decades. It launched games, stored homework, saved businesses, and quietly shaped the way an entire generation interacted with computers. So settle into that soft CRT glow in your memory and let's travel back to a time when your digital life fit into a square barely the size of your palm. The birth of a storage icon. Our journey begins at IBM in the late 1960s. Back then, computers filled rooms, and updating software was almost theatrical. Technicians carried stacks of punch cards and reel tapes. Everything was huge, slow, and inconvenient. IBM's engineers knew they needed something different, something small, portable, and simple. Alan Shugart and his team developed a flexible magnetic disk sealed in a protective sleeve. In 1971, the first 8-inch floppy arrived. It may have held only about 80 kilobytes, but in an era where data lived on bulky paper cards, this was freedom in plastic form. What mattered wasn't the size, it was the idea. For the first time, software could travel. Data could be handed from machine to machine. And computing suddenly felt less like industrial machinery and more like something an individual could use. The 5.25-inch revolution. By the mid-1970s, personal computers were beginning their slow march into homes. The Apple II, Tandy's TRS-80, and early IBM machines all needed a way for everyday users to store information. The original 8-inch floppy was simply too big and too delicate for this new world. So the 5.25-inch floppy was born. It slipped into drives more easily, fit inside compact home computers, and quickly became the standard throughout the late 70s and 80s. Suddenly, everything from text adventures to spreadsheets came packaged on these thin magnetic circles. For many kids, the first thrill of computing came from sliding a floppy disk into a drive, watching the directory appear, and picking a game from the list. This was the format that carried early gaming culture, that held school projects, and that introduced millions to the digital frontier. The rise of the 3.5-inch disk. While the 5.25-inch disk was convenient, it wasn't exactly sturdy. They bent. They tore. A small speck of dust could end your entire project. Sony stepped in with a new idea, a smaller disk encased in a rigid plastic shell with a metal shutter to protect the magnetic surface. The 3.5-inch floppy arrived in the early 1980s and immediately felt modern, like a piece of technology meant to last. Its capacity grew over time, eventually reaching the famous 1.44 megabytes. It clicked into drives with a satisfying mechanical snap, and that sound became synonymous with computing in the 80s and 90s. Entire operating systems shipped on sets of these disks. School labs organized them by color. Office workers labeled them with permanent markers and guarded them like treasure. This format didn't just become popular, it became iconic. Cultural impact. By the late 80s and early 90s, the floppy disk had become more than a storage tool. It was part of the language of technology. If you walked into an office, you'd see racks of them sorted by project. If you visited a friend, they might have a drawer full of disks containing games, music trackers, or little programs downloaded from early bulletin board systems. Gamers traded disks at school. Programmers carried utilities and boot tools everywhere they went. And magazines often included demo floppies glued to the covers, turning every issue into a little hands-on adventure. The floppy became a bridge between creativity and technology. It made computers feel approachable, something you could shape, modify, and take with you. A creative subculture. Over time, floppy disks began slipping into art and DIY culture as well. People painted on them, turned them into earrings and wall displays, and used them as a kind of retro badge of honor. In some communities, passing a floppy to someone felt like sharing a secret, whether it was a game, a homemade program, or a little digital note. And ironically, even after the floppy faded away, its shape lived on everywhere. The save icon in software, the one you've probably clicked thousands of times, is still a floppy disk. A whole generation recognizes the symbol without ever having touched the real thing. It's a ghost of technology that outlived its physical form. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, floppy disks weren't just storage, they were a small part of everyday life. You probably remember that nervous moment when the computer paused before reading your disk, as if deciding whether it felt cooperative that day. You might remember the colorful disks sold in packs, the handwritten labels, the habit of shaking a disk lightly as if that would make it work better. Maybe you had that one disk full of games you shared with friends, or the school day when someone forgot their homework because the family dog ate the floppy. You might remember the clicking rhythm of the drive, the way the shutter slid open if you pressed it with your thumb, or the bittersweet feeling of losing everything to a corrupted disk. These small objects carried more than data, they carried memories. By the late 1990s, technology had finally caught up with the floppy. CD-ROMs offered hundreds of megabytes. USB flash drives were tiny and tough. Broadband internet made physical file sharing less important. The floppy simply couldn't keep up. Around the early 2000s, computers began shipping without floppy drives. By 2011, Sony, the last major producer, officially discontinued them. And yet, floppy disks never completely vanished. Certain industrial machines still use them. Collectors still seek them. Retro enthusiasts display them like tiny artifacts of a digital childhood. And the save icon ensures their silhouette will remain recognizable for generations. The story of the floppy disk is really the story of our early relationship with digital life. It reminds us of a time when storage was physical, when your data lived on an object you could hold, label, and even lose. It taught us patience, responsibility, and a strange kind of pride in carrying our own digital creations. It built habits and memories that modern computing has all but erased. So here's to the floppy disk, the little square that helped launch a digital revolution. Thank you for watching Retro Treasure Unearthed. If this trip down memory lane brought back a sound, a memory, or a feeling, share it in the comments. And as always, keep the retro spirit alive.